And we're back to learning to code, and this time I'm going to walk you through the 9th course on freecodecamp.org with the new responsive web design section. And this time it's about building a quiz. It's going to teach us the basics of accessibility. It's still HTML and CSS. This is the end result that we're going to create. In step 1 we have a boilerplate, so the basic structure of a website using HTML. And we're going to add the language attribute to our HTML tag, set its value to English. And here it says why we do that. It will assist the screen readers and tell them what language we're using. Step 2. Let's define the charset by using a meta tag. And it's usually the value of UTF-8. And in the explanation it tells you that it's the only encoding supported by most browsers nowadays. So this is almost something that you have to do every time. Let's add another meta tag and use the viewport. So we're going to make our website responsive. We need a name attribute for that. Set it to the viewport, then use the content attribute and set its value to width equals device width. And we'll set the initial scale to 1.0. And that sets our browser window to the size of the screen, or the size of the browser within the screen that the user is using later on. So when we resize that, everything is going to be responsive, and it's something that you almost always have to do as well. In step 4, we've got something that we haven't had yet in the previous courses. We're still in the head of our HTML code. And this time we're going to add a meta tag with the name of description. And we'll set the value to something that explains what the website's going to be about. Let's make this FCC quiz. And in step 5, you can see it has changed it. It has given it a little bit more of a descriptive value, freecodecamp accessibility quiz practice project. So you just have to put something in it that explains what your website is going to be about so that the browser knows. It's good for SEO, for example. Let us add a title here in step 5, and I'll just copy paste this one, put it right there. We've used titles before, so that's nothing new. It's going to be the stuff that's going to be visible in your tab. Step 6. We are now in the body of our HTML. So we've left the head. We're going to add a header. Don't mistake that for a head. A header element is in the body and a head element is not. It is used for storing all of the meta information that we've added. And we're also supposed to give a main section to our body. In step 7, we'll add content. Our head needs to have an image, an h1, and a nav element for navigation. The image already should have a source that's given here. It's an SVG, so it's a vector file. Let us add the ID of logo. and the h1 should have this text. We can move on to step 8. We are now in the CSS for the first time, and vector files, they can be resized without losing quality. So when you use, for example, a JPEG, it has a certain resolution, and if you zoom in, you can see all of these pixels. That's not going to happen with SVG files, as they are vector files. This is the advantage of using them. You can, for example, create vector files with Inkscape or Adobe Illustrator. In this case, it was given, and we've used it right here for the image with the ID of logo. So I use logo as a selector and adjust the width with the given values right here. So it has sized it down, it's still there, but we can't see it anymore because the contrast is so low. We're going to do something about it in step 9. We are changing the background color. Let us do this. The hex code is given. And now we can see it again. And we should also set the aspect ratio. So this can be done for vector files easily without losing any quality. And it should also have a padding of 0.4 root EM, so that you can see right here, it creates this box that we've given a background color, and we can adjust the aspect ratio right here. Alright, let's move on to step 10. We're going to style our header. At first with a width of 100%. For now we can't see much happening, but the header, it contains the image, the h1 and our navigation. Just as a reminder, we'll change the height. Still, nothing is visible, but if we add a new background color, it's going to become obvious what our header actually is. So you can see it's this right here. Let us change the display to flex. Step 11. We'll change the font color of our h1 because it doesn't fit well with our background color for the header. Now we can see it again. And if we change our font size, it's going to fit better into our header. And now it looks like it actually belongs to it, which it does. Let's go to step 12, and now we're going to take care of the navigation. We already have added our nav elements, but they don't contain any elements, at least for now. And usually you use an unordered list and add your list items to it. So for every element of your navigation bar, you want to have a list item. In this case, we have 3: info, HTML, and CSS. I can already see one bullet point. The other two are also there, but the contrast is too low with our background color of the header. And for now, it's vertically stacked. Usually you don't want to have that, so we're going to take care of that in future steps, but for now, we are also supposed to nest it inside of anchor tags. They don't have an href for now, but we want to make these elements of our navigation bar links. Let's go to the CSS in step 13. We'll select our navbar and the unordered list inside of it, and we'll set the display once more to flex. And now it's not vertically anymore, it's horizontally aligned. But we should write it like this, so that every UL that's part of its parent, you could say navigation, so one that's on top is selected. And let us also change the justify content property to space evenly. It's going to spread our list items out, which gives it more space. Let's take care of our main. What should be in it? We need section elements. And we also need to create a form. Let us first create the sections open and closing tag, and then copy paste it 2 times. And they should all be nested inside of a form. So let me write it like this. We can already give it the action attribute with this value. By default, the method is get. But in this case, we are supposed to use something else, which is called post. If you don't know yet what that means, it's stuff that happens in the backend, so it's not really HTML anymore. So I don't want to get too much into detail about it. For now, just accept it that we need to use post instead of get. And we can move on to step 15. We're going to set the roles for our sections, and we'll use region for each. And now we're going to use different aria-labelledbys for each, and the value is given. So these 3 sections will have different content. First will be about student info, second HTML questions, and the third about CSS questions. I'm writing it like this. Search engines and a browser, they know what we have in these different sections. Let's add h2 headings inside of these sections. We'll give it an ID. And with the value, I'll stick to what we already have here, so student info, HTML, and CSS questions. And we should give it suitable text in between. Step 17. We're back to styling our website and the CSS. And we'll style the H1 and H2 elements by giving it a different font family. So our H1 was part of the header right here, and the H2s, these are our 3 headlines that we can see right below the header. We need a fallback font, just use sans serif and separate both of them with a comma. We need to adjust the border bottom, the values are given, and it's going to underline our H2s. But it shouldn't underline the H1, so let me cut that out here and add a new H2 selector for it. So I didn't read that carefully enough. I'll paste it into my H2 selector, and now it's what we needed. Step 18, and we'll get back to our links that we've created inside of the navigation bar. And we can give it now an href. And as values, we're going to add our H2s. So we've given them IDs. And you can use IDs as links by using this hashtag key. And then we've had student info, HTML questions, and CSS questions as IDs in our HTML. So if the user now clicks in the navigation bar on these, the browser would jump to the specific sections or the specific H2s that have these IDs. And you can see right here, so here was our first H2 with student info, here the second HTML, and a third CSS questions. Now the browser doesn't have to jump because there is not much of content inside of our body, but when we add it, it's going to become more obvious what that actually did, what we've just done. Step 19. Let us add a div container to our first section, right below the H2 of student info. We'll give it a class of info. And we need 3 div elements. We'll add a label inside. And then add an import field. Let me copy paste that for the other 2 div containers. Step 20. Let us link the input and the label. In this case, the input is not nested inside the label. So it's a good idea to use for and ID attributes with the same value to connect them. We need student's name, email address, and date of birth. So let's use values like name in the first, and then the second one, something like email or just mail, and in the third one, date of birth or something. So these values, they should all be descriptive. It's a good idea to do that when you make a mistake or when you have problems on your website. You can find them easier when you give that descriptive values. You also need text content. We'll nest it inside of our label. Let me make it, for example, your name, your email, and your date of birth or something. And that should be fine. Step 21. It has changed these values to name, email, and DOB. Don't be confused by that. Freecodecamp sometimes changes it when you jump one step ahead. Let us add the proper type and name to our input fields. First one is a text. Let's give it a name. Second one is an email. Let us give it the name email. Third one is a date. Let's give it the name date of birth. We need a placeholder for our first one, name. Let me just add my name as an example. My mistake right here. I've written mail instead of email. Obviously we need type email, or we could change the name as well, or just keep it as mail. It's fine. Step 22. When it comes to accessibility, using placeholders isn't always the best idea. It can become confusing to the user. So let's delete this. And move on to step 23. DOB is not very descriptive. We know that it's date of birth, but does the user actually know? Especially when you are accessing websites using a screen reader, it's not a good idea to just add a DOB. So we're going to add a span element after it. Let's give it a class SR only for screen readers. Step 24. We'll add some text. It's going to be nested inside of our span elements. For now it's visible. But in step 25 we're going to select the SR only class. So everything that's nested inside of the span, in this case its parenthesis date of birth, will now be styled differently. And the values and properties are given. This is something that you don't have to remember. You can look that up, that these values and properties are best practice for making text invisible. So text that's just supposed to be there for screen readers and not really visible for users who don't use screen readers. But let's just copy paste this. And then we're good. Step 26. We're in our second section, which was the HTML questions section. And we need two div containers, opening closing tags. Let me reset this lesson in case I might have misclicked here somewhere. Let's add the div containers. Need a class of question block. and a p element inside. Text of incrementing numbers, so we'll start with 1. And one fieldset element with the class of question. We can copy and paste that, and then we'll have to adjust the text. So instead of 1, it's now going to be 2. Step 27. Each field set will contain true or false questions. Let us add a legend. And we also need unordered lists. Let me put it like this so that you can see properly what we've got. So within our field set is now the legend, and beneath it is going to be our unordered list with 2 options. So we need list items 2 times with opening and closing tags. This already gives us 2 bullet points for this unordered list. Let me copy this one and I paste it right here into our second field set in the HTML section. Step 28. We'll give names to our field sets. Let me just call it question 1 and question 2, as I don't know what it's going to be about in the next steps. And the unordered list, they need a class of answers list. Don't forget the second one right here. Finally, the legend. Alright, we can put our questions here, and it needs to be a true or false question. Let me just use this as a placeholder for now. Is it true or false? And the second one, is it also true or false? And now we have the questions that freecodecamp wants. And we can work with that in step 29. Let's nest a label inside of our list items. Within each label, we're going to nest inputs. Now we need the appropriate type. And for true and false, we can use a radio button. So we use that as a type. And we can already move on to step 30. Let's add IDs to our radio button inputs. And we're going to link the labels to them. So again, we'll use 4 attributes and ID attributes with the same value to have them linked. The values are given is Q1A1 for the first one, Q1A2 for the second one, and so forth. Step 31. We haven't yet linked our labels and inputs, or we can do that right here. Even though it's nested, it's not necessary to do that when it's nested. But it's best practice to still do it. As I've already said, we need the for attribute and give it the same value as our input type radio that's nested inside. So in this case, q1 minus a1. Step 32. We need a text for labels. And the input needs to come before the text. And as we are asking true or false questions, this is our text. So it needs to come after the input right here. And it's still nested inside of our label. And we are also supposed to give it the matching value. So it's true false once more. And we're good to go to step 33. Radio buttons aren't yet grouped, so we can select both at the same time, which shouldn't be possible when it comes to a true or false question. So we're going to link them, or we're going to group them. And the way to do it is to use the same name value for each. So if we use name q1 for the first question, and the two answers, they are now linked, and q2 for the second question, and there are two answers. So once you've done that, you can only select one and the other will get deselected automatically. Step 34. You can use a new pseudo selector that we haven't used yet, which is the before selector. So if we make it p, then before, and give it the content of question and this hashtag or number sign, you can see that this is placed before our paragraphs. And we've used two paragraphs here in our HTML section. So if I add content to it, for example A1, it's going to get added. So this is what this pseudo selector does. And here's our HTML section, and here are the p elements. So whatever we add here as content is going to be put before the content inside of the p elements right here. Let me add 1, 2, 3, and you can see that's also placed before it. Or if I just add FFF, you get the idea now. Step 35. Final section, which was about our CSS questions. And we want to have a drop down and a text box. Again, we'll start with div containers. Class is given, it's formrow. at least for the first one. And we're going to nest 4 more div containers inside of it. Let's use class question block. We can copy and paste that 3 times. But the second and the fourth, they need to have the class answer. Step 36. Let's nest a label inside of our question block class div containers. And we can already give it text content. Let's make it question 1 and question 2. Step 37. Let's take care of our answer elements. The first one is going to be our dropdown, so we'll use a select element for that. And we are going to nest option elements inside. It's supposed to be required, so let us add that attribute already to it. And now we give it the options, opening and closing tag. First one gets a value of quotation marks, so it's going to be empty, and the text should be select an option. You can already see the dropdown now with our first option. Let's add the second one. It should be yes, and the third one should be no. And these 3 options are now part of our dropdown. So we can already select that right here in our browser window. Let's move on to step 38. Once again, we are linking labels, but this time not to an input, but to a select. The way to do it is the same. We use a for attribute in our label. Let's give it the value of selection. We use the same value for the ID in the select, and we can also give it a name. Let's call it selection once more. Step 39. Let's take care of the text area. And freecodecamp has given it different values for our select, so it's about customer now. Don't get confused there. It has just replaced some values. Let's add the text area right here to our div class answer, which was for the second question block. And we are going to adjust calls and rows right here. No values are given, so we're going to just do it. I don't know, let's make it like 20 and maybe 100 something. It also needs a placeholder. Let me just type something in it. Step 40. Once again, we'll link the label, so we can also link it to text area elements. And we use for and ID attributes for that. Nothing new here. The text area should also have a name. Step 41. Now it has called our text area CSS questions. So once again, freecodecamp has changed a couple of values, but everything we've done was correct. And now we're going to add a submit button to our form. It's important that it is nested inside of the form, but we can add it right here below our last section. Let us use an input tag for that and give it a type submit. And I'll make it English. My browser is set to German. So let me give it a value, and now it says submit. Step 42. You can see freecodecamp hasn't used an input element, it has used a button, which achieves the same result. So we could have also used that in step 41. Are we good to proceed? Let's add a footer and an address. Should be after the main. So right here in line 112, we'll add the footer, opening closing tags, and nested inside should be the address. Step 43. Here are values and BR tags. BR tags are for line breaks. So we paste it right here instead of our address tags. Let me indent that properly. And thanks to the BR tags, it is written in new lines every time in our browser window. Step 44. We're going to make freecodecamp a link. So we'll just use these A tags, so anchor tags, and nest the text freecodecamp inside. The href value is already given, freecodecamp.org. And this says turn the text into a link that would redirect us to freecodecamp.org. Step 45. We're back in our CSS. Once again, we are styling our navigation bar. We want to select the list items inside. The way to write it, for example, is like this. Navigation, then LE, curly brackets, and then we'll add properties and values right here. Can move on to step 46. So we're going to talk about contrast once more. Change the font color of all anchor elements within the list elements. So if we would select all the anchors like this, we would also target our link in the footer. But it's not what we want. We only want to target the ones in the header, so our navigation bar. Therefore, we need to write it like this. So if an anchor element is part of a list, it's going to get this new color. And let's go to step 47. At first, we'll change the text decoration to none, so that we can get rid of the underline from the anchor tags. We still want to only target those that are part of the navigation bar. And now we'll need a new selector for navigation and the list items inside, but only when we hover over it with our mouse. So write it like this, for example. Or write it like this, but there's a difference between the anchor and the list item. So let's stick to the anchor, and we want to switch the colors. So the color now is this grayish, white grayish color, and we want to give it this color now, so the background color of our header. And then the background color of our links should become the color of the links for now, which is this gray. Let me copy paste that. And now if I hover over it, you can see that the color switches. What else have I missed here? I should add it to the list items. So you can see this box gets a little bit bigger when I use LE instead of A. So don't use the anchor elements, use the list item elements. And now it should work for step 47. We also need to make the cursor pointer, so I forgot that. Right here. And if I hover over it, our mouse now changes from a cursor to a pointer. But now we're good. Let us proceed to step 48. In this step, we're going to address our header once more in the CSS. We've already selected that in a previous step, so we can use it. What do we need? We need justify content space evenly. And paste it right here. But in this case, we want to have a different value, so not space evenly. You can see what it does if I delete the space evenly right here. It needs to be vertically centered, so make it align items center. And that puts the H1 here in line with our logo. Then fix the header to the top of the viewport. So make it position fixed. And now this header is fixed. But we don't want to have a space on top. And we also want to have space between and not space evenly. So my mistake. That spreads it out differently. And here's our top position for the header. So what I just mentioned, we need to change that as well, so that we can get rid of this top line. Right here, you can see that. I'm going to make it 10, we'll get a little bit of spacing here, and we want to have it set to 0. Step 49. Our content doesn't wrap, and that produces a problem with our H1. Let me size this window down and you can see it. So we want to have it centered instead of left aligned right here. Let us make it text align center, and this solves the problem. Then we'll select the main. And we'll add a padding. Let us make it auto. That's not what it wants. Let us change the top padding to like 25. That's not enough. 250 is way too much. Let me make it 50. Then it should be fine. Let us delete the other ones, so it only wants a padding top. But that's now fine. We can proceed to step 50. Alright, there's another problem with our unordered list, so in our navigation bar. And we can solve that issue by using flex wrap and set it to wrap. If we don't have that, let me size this one down. See, we don't see our list items anymore, and if I add the wrap, they're going to get stacked vertically. So this is what we want, or at least it should be what freecodecamp wants from us. And we're also supposed to add these properties. Step 51. Let's select our section elements, curly brackets. We'll set the width to 80%. I'm going to center it with margins. Adding 10 pixels to the bottom margin. So let us do it maybe like this and see if that's what we need. But let me directly write it like so. And we also need, what is it? A max width of 600 pixels. Oh, and in this case, we also need to adjust the other margins. So it wants us to set left and right margin to auto, so that it's in center. Alright, sometimes you have to try. Freecodecamp isn't clear every time in its task description, but that's what we needed. We can go to step 52. And we should replace the top margin with a top padding. So let me make the margin top 0 and the padding top 60. And that was it. Step 53. We're going to select our info class. What was that? Let us check our index. And here it is. So we've used that here in our student info for the div containers. So this is what we are targeting now. What properties do we need? We need the padding. But only for top and left, and the other one should be 0. So the first value is top, and the left is the last value here. We will make that 10 pixels. And that's fine. Step 54. We're going to target our formrow class, which was in the last section, so our CSS section. Somewhere here, I believe it was the drop down. Yeah, it was our drop down. We need to address the margin and the padding once more. And only padding left and right should have a value, top and bottom should have 0. So write it like this. And then we increase the font size for the input elements. And make it 16 pixels. Step 55. We're going to play around with our first section, so the student info. So let us write it like this. Dot info for the class and then only the inputs, curly brackets, width of 50%. And we're going to text align left. Step 56. And again, we need the info class. This time we're going to target the labels. Width of 10%. And we need a minimum width of 55 pixels. (57). We'll need our input and the label elements. But only with a class of info, so write it like this. Set the display to inline block. And for the label, we'll need to change the text align to right. That's going to put name, email, and DOB to the right hand side. Step 58. Our class is given question block, the curly brackets, and we'll use these properties and values. So we'll align the text to the left, make it a display block. Set the width to 100% and adjust margin and padding. Step 59. Going to select our paragraphs. So these were question 1, question 2. We'll change the margin, top, padding left, and the font size. Step 60. We're going to remove the border of our fieldset elements, but only when I have the class question. And we also need to remove the padding bottom. And for border, we'll just type none, and now it's gone. Step 61. We're going to remove the font styling for the list items, but only when I have the class answers list. And then we're going to remove the unordered list padding. So let's first do the stuff for the answers list class. List style, set it to none. This gets rid of our bullet points. But only add it to the list items, so we can write it like this. And for the unordered list, we'll need a new selector and set the padding to 0. And we're going to add a padding of 0 here as well. Alright, this is what freecodecamp wanted for me. So I could simply use the class answers list, but I've missed that the padding should be 0 as well. Let's go to step 62. Now we're going to style the submit button down here. As I've said before, we've used an input, but you could also use a button. As it has used a button by default, we're going to use that as a selector, and then we'll paste our properties right here. It's going to give us a margin, a width, a padding, increase the font size, change the background color and gives us a border, and makes it a display block. Step 63. Going to change the footer background color. And we're going to use flexbox to horizontally center the text. Let's address the background color first, the value is given. And that should already be it. Now the flexbox part, change it display to flex. And we also need to justify the content. Alright, let's go to step 64. Contrast very low here. So let us fix that. We're going to target the anchor elements within the footer. You can, for example, write it like this. Going to change the color. Let me just make it white, so I use FFF. Let's see if that was enough. Alright, after reading it a little bit more carefully, we need to add it to the footer and to the anchor element within the footer. So write the selector like this, and now we're good. Step 65. Going to select the address element, horizontally center the text with text align center and add a padding of 5 pixels. Step 66. Now you can finally see that this is linked. So we can jump to the 3 different sections by clicking in the top navigation bar on info, HTML, and CSS. Or we can give it a scroll behavior. Use this star key and then set the property scroll behavior to smooth. Oh, I wrote it in UK English, it needs to have it in US English. So there's a little bit of a typo, but now the scrolling works smoothly. Now we need to add this media feature. And it shows you that also selectors can be nested. For example, in these media features. So here's our selector with the property that we've adjusted in the last step. And we're going to add a media feature and nest this selector inside. Should be written like this. And the feature comes into these normal parentheses. The feature in this case is called prefers reduce motion. And we'll set its value to no preference. Step 68. You can also use access keys as attributes. So we're back in our index.html. And as an example, you can give that for buttons. If you want to submit something, you don't have to click it. You can just use the access key. In this case, S would be it. And we're going to add that attribute to our links in the navigation bar. So the info, the HTML and the CSS, and let me just use I, H and C for it. And this was the last step. So it was a little bit of a longer one, and some of these tasks weren't clear from the start, but we got through it. Once again, check it out yourself, go to freecodecamp, it's free, and then refer to my walkthrough when you get stuck. I hope this video was helpful, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.